the liftoff. 32 minutes.
Romeo Sierra, listen. GB 3RS, Golf Bravo 3 Romeo Sierra, listen.
W0ORE on board Challenger. Very fine, John. We're just having a great time now. We had kind of a rocky start with the solar obs on day 3, but they're getting the problems worked out, and we're getting some good science. Okay, tell me what kind of scene I can send you, and I'll send it along. GB3RS, W0ORE.
In 1985, amateur radio lifted off into space with Dr. Tony England, call sign W0ORE, on board. A keen radio ham since his school days, Tony England has helped to bring personal space communication to radio amateurs around the world. Using simple equipment, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world are talking to each other over the air every hour of the day. People of all ages and abilities join together as equals, whatever their background, in global communication.
This is Golf 0 Kilo Alpha Quebec.
You can use plain language, and you can use the Morse code. Operating from the comfort of their own homes, amateurs contact each other by shortwave radio using specially authorised frequencies that can carry their signals to the four corners of the Earth.
My name is Ray, Romeo Alpha Yankee. Ray is the handle, and we are living in the countryside town in southeastern Finland, 20 kilometers from the Russian border.
Hello, I'm Jim Bacon. You may be more used to seeing me presenting the television weather forecasts. Today, I'm standing in front of the White Rose Amateur Radio Club in Leeds. There are something like 800 amateur radio clubs around the country, and to find out where they are, just look for the arrows. My own involvement in amateur radio goes back many years and helped me to develop a special interest in weather forecasting. This eventually led me into an exciting career in meteorology and then into television broadcasting. Good evening. Some quite wet weather across the region last night. Amounts of rainfall just short of the ½ an inch in places. Most of that cloud has now moved away. Perhaps I should say a word about how radio works, what it is really. Normally when you talk to people you might be using a telephone where you've got a wire connecting one person to the other. In radio and in amateur radio we use radio waves. That's a signal that leaves a transmitter and then is sent via an aerial directed out and away. Now normally it would keep going forever, but in our case it eventually reaches a layer above the Earth called the ionosphere. It's a reflecting layer for radio signals, and it will eventually bring the radio signals back down to Earth, and that's where the listening station will hear them. Like the rest of the 1.5 million licensed amateurs around the world, my ideal relaxation is to switch on the rig and tune around the amateur wave bands looking for a good contact. Years ago, I got myself an amateur transmitting license by passing a couple of fairly simple exams based on elementary radio theory and practice, and was eventually issued with a call sign G3YLA. With me is Ted Walker, G0KAQ, and Ted, you won the Young Amateur of the Year Award 1989, but before we go on to amateur radio, tell me what this G0KAQ means.
Well, that's my own personal call sign, which I've been given by the government, and that identifies me to anybody else in the world as being in England. CQ, CQ, CQ on 20 metres, CQ on the 20 metre band. This is G0KAQ, Golf 0 Kilo Alpha Quebec.
When did you first become interested in amateur radio?
Well, it was when I was about 12 or 13, and I remember tuning around on an ordinary medium wave band and hearing one or two things coming in that I didn't expect. from there on, I realised there was more to radio than just listening to the local radio station. And I remembered stories about my great-grandfather, who used to build his own radios back in the early years of the century.
Do you build any equipment yourself?
I use a VHF aerial inside, which cost me all of 70p, which was made out of old coat hangers.
Good heavens, as simple as a coat hanger can make an aerial.
That's right, all put together in the right way.
Marvellous, and I suppose you hang your shirts on a peg now, do you?
Delta Lima 9, Sierra Charlie. This is Golf 0 Kilo Alpha, Quebec. 73, bye-bye, Carl.
Radio amateurs exchange cards to confirm a radio contact, and these are called QSL cards. Ted's collection on the wall here represents contacts with amateurs from all over the world. Sometimes the cards can be used as a proof of contact to gain an award, for example for working 100 different countries. Here Ted is busy soldering, and construction is undoubtedly an interesting aspect of amateur radio. Of course, some people buy new or second-hand radio equipment to get onto the air, but one of the most rewarding activities is surely to put together your own transmitter or receiver. It may, for example, be a transmitter for Morse, or CW as it's also called, as this represents the simplest to build, perhaps by using an inexpensive kit of parts. Or maybe going out and buying the bits and pieces from the dealers.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. See ya.
You will also find many bargains at the various rallies around the country. How much are the old Morse keys?
$2.50.
$2.50. Don't see many of those around. Are they they're army, aren't they?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Right. It's all a lot simpler than it looks. And once you've learned the basics, it's amazing just how quickly you can progress to the more advanced equipment. Like this HF or high-frequency transceiver used for making worldwide contacts. In fact, there are so many aspects to the hobby. For instance, you can talk around the world from your home station or to a friend just around the corner by putting your radio in your own car.
G4YLM, G4YLM.
And amateur radio makes an ideal hobby for anyone who is blind or disabled and can't get about so easily.
G1IGH, G1IGH.
G4YLM.
Yeah, we have another event station, another special event station in October for the Guide Dogs for the Blind. We've been putting it on now for the past 4 or 5 years. Usually we do very, very well up there, so it should be okay. G1IGH, G4YLM.
G4YLM, G1IGH mobile. Find Marjorie. 73, G1IGH mobile.
73s, by the way, is the international code for best wishes. You can always visit a local radio amateur station to get a taste of what the hobby of amateur radio is all about, and most amateurs will be pleased to show you around. Like these scouts who are encouraged to learn about amateur radio for their communications badge.
To Australia on 5 watts. It can be done.
How far would it go?
Or you could more or less guarantee that you could work CW up and down Great Britain, we'll say.
So how much is a little kit like this costing?
Probably a kit like that. You'd probably buy the board and the components for something like £12 or £15.
How much does all this equipment cost?
Oh, there's a lot of pennies there. That's why you start off with something what's cheaper and smaller to make, you see. You can, like I say, you can buy these in a kit and make them up yourself.
All ages can take part in amateur radio, and demonstrations at the local amateur radio club are a good start for many youngsters.
But compared with the receiver you would buy in a shop, it's quite simple. And this one is going all the way to Pakistan, to the Pakistan Radio Society. They asked me would I build a White Rose receiver, because it's now well known all over the world. And I said, yes, I'll build one.
My name is Tony, and I am the chairman of the White Rose Amateur Radio Society.
When amateur radio club members visit schools, the opportunity to learn about amateur radio provides the children with a practical insight into electronics. And it is good to get hands-on experience to go with all that science theory.
This is the main tuning control, which enables us to change from one signal to another signal. There you are.
My name's Kartik and I live in Alwoodley. I'm 9 years old.
Oh there, GX8LVQ G3SPX. Fine, Kartik. Hello, and good afternoon to you, Kartik. Nice to hear you. And I got everything from you okay. I understand you're 9, and I believe you said you lived in Alwoodley there. But anyway, nice to hear you, Kartik. GX8LVQ G3SPX.
Golf X-ray 8 Lima Victor Quebec stroke P. Will you just say
Amateur radio can make a useful addition to school curriculum science, and the practical engineering aspects of amateur radio provide a good grounding for many electronics career opportunities. Racal is a major UK electronics group with a variety of telecommunications businesses. Peter Blair, G3LTF, is Managing Director of Racal Research. So has amateur radio helped him in his career?
Well, I became interested in amateur radio at the age of 10 and very quickly became quite fascinated by VHF and UHF systems, and at that time, of course, everybody built their own equipment, and that certainly gave me a very good feel for the practical aspects of working at those very short wavelengths. And that was certainly a great help to me at the early stages of my career. But I think it's very important to get across to young people that the practical interest is very useful, but it has to be backed up by a proper training and professional qualification.
Not far from Racal Research is Surrey University, the home of UOSAT, Spacecraft Engineering Research Unit. It is a project which has come about through amateur radio and is largely staffed by radio amateurs. This is the satellite control room. Here the progress of amateur satellites in orbit is not only followed, but controlled. The research unit provides unique learning opportunities for students from all over the world. Its satellite projects are tied in with professional and amateur radio communities, also with the schools.
The satellites carry a wide range of payloads. They carry payloads both for the professional community and the amateur radio and educational communities. What we try to do is to make sure that the data from all these experiments is transmitted down in such a way that it can be picked up using relatively simple and inexpensive equipment, which is freely available both to schools or radio amateurs, as well as the professional community. And so this is the high-tech end of amateur radio in one sense, in that we are professionally engaged in space research, but at the same time we work in a very symbiotic relationship with the amateur radio community. And within the unit we have a team of about 30 people, the majority of whom are radio amateurs, and we design, build and launch and then operate in orbit small microsatellites.
Amateur radio satellites were launched by many countries from as early as 1961. Known as Oscars, orbiting satellites carrying amateur radio, they've increased the scope of amateur radio communication worldwide. Harrogate Ladies College is one of the 1,000 or so schools which actively track the amateur radio satellites from their club stations. As Head of Physics, Richard Horton explains.
Here at Harrogate Ladies College, we set up the permanent station in 1982 in this shack, which was purpose-built, and we've gradually built up our equipment from that point. We have an HF station to work the world, a VHF station for local contacts, and of course our latest addition is the satellite station to work Oscars 10 and 13 and the new satellites that will be launched in the future.
Tango Sierra calling CQ Oscar CQ and standing by.
The satellite operation covers quite a number of aspects of amateur radio. It also, of course, cuts across the physics that some of the girls are taking at advanced level. It's certainly a hobby for life. I think this is one of the reasons we try and encourage the girls to take it up while at school. They can enjoy the social side of it, talking to people over the world, finding out about their different cultures and lifestyles, but at the same time they can link into that the technical side, the electronics, and really as they progress through their life, they'll find that there are lots of different aspects of amateur radio that they may switch between.
My best 73s from you, hope to work you perhaps later on down the logbook. This is Golf Zero Hotel Charlie Alpha signing off.
Okay, 30HCA.
It is fun, and when you've actually done your first call and you have confidence in that, the first call is always the most difficult, of course, you can just operate when you want because you feel enough confidence to talk to people, and you realise that everyone that you will talk to knows what it's like to make the first call, and they're very nice and very understanding. They make allowances quite often for the silly little mistakes.
There is an addition to a person's knowledge base just by understanding the fact that you can communicate from one side of the world to the other, no matter what sort of set it's with. I mean, there is still a magic involved in that. Increasingly, there's going to be a requirement for mobile data communications and mobile access to computers, and I think that the amateur radio enthusiasts who are working in this field today are probably going to produce people who are of great use to the industry in this particular area.
Data's very like Morse, except it's electronically produced. That's the simplest way of putting it. A lot of amateur work's done by voice, obviously speaking to other amateurs, but this is my forte. I know it's an old-fashioned saying, but literally the world's your oyster with this game. If propagation's right, in other words, if your signals are getting through, you can. I've worked into Uruguay, I've worked into Brunei. Recently, I worked into China. The card just came yesterday from a chap from China. So, you know, really, you can work anywhere, and of course, you can work locally. You don't need a lot of power. You don't have to be whacking out a signal like the TV companies and the radio companies. We get away with 60 watts or even less. The people who what we call QRP stations, they use minimal power. They're only using milliwatts. So to the people like that, I'm really a high power station. We'll be talking about 60 watts.
Modern amateur technology allows the home operator to communicate with stations worldwide. Now, Jack is able to receive facsimile broadcasts from many countries, and by this means pictures or documents can be sent over the radio. He's particularly interested in receiving weather charts, although not all radio amateurs will be able to make sense of these hieroglyphics. What amateurs can and do provide, though, is a useful emergency service when the weather brings on a natural disaster, whether it's floods, gales or fires, and in other emergencies too. Amateurs of all ages can help others to cope with the communications problems caused by any kind of disaster. RayNet is the name of the voluntary organisation of radio amateurs which provides vital communications with other emergency services. There are similar organisations in other countries too. RayNet members are often involved in training exercises coordinated from emergency planning centres around the country. This particular exercise is following the progress of competitors in the Humber Marathon at various stages along the route. RayNet members work closely with the St John's Ambulance Brigade, police and fire service at these kinds of events.
G4KUH, this is G4SUW Mobile, a message.
G4SUW Mobile, pass your message.
From G4SUW Mobile, the first runners have now crossed the southern end of the bridge.
End of message. Roger, G4KUH to standby.
Like all hobbies and sporting activities, amateur radio is what you make it. These Chinese amateur radio enthusiasts are competing in a fox hunt, trying to track down a hidden transmitter. By taking 2 or more bearings with a directional antenna and receiver, the location of the fixed station can be made by triangulation, and it's against the clock. Less wearing on the shoe leather, but equally competitive, is the kind of contest we see being set up here. The idea behind this competition between clubs and individual amateurs around the world is to make as many contacts with as many different stations as possible within a time limit. And there are in fact 2 separate contests, one on HF and the other on VHF, going on simultaneously at this event.
CQ contest, Golf 8, Lima, Victor, Quebec, contest.
CQ RSGB contest, G3 X-ray, Echo Papa.
008-570.
CQ contest, G3 X-ray, Echo Papa, contest.
Fox uniform, QSL. 5 and 9, old man, 5 and 9.
It's not all hard work. There's usually a good social side to most amateur radio club activities. Although in a 24-hour contest, someone will have to keep the station going through the night. Amateur radio is by nature a pursuit which fosters goodwill, both near to home and around the world.
Sugar Alpha calling CQ20 and standing by for any call. I'm a big believer in the friendship side of radio, and I mean, I even have on my card that amateur radio for worldwide friendship. It's what I promote radio as.
Amateur radio can be a great means of communication around the world with people who you wouldn't normally have any contact. And a lot of international friendship and goodwill has been fostered through amateur radio.
Finally, let me quote you something that was said by the man we like to think of as the very first radio amateur. He was Marconi, the founding father of radio communications, who said, "Had it not been for amateurs, wireless telegraphy, as a great worldwide fact, might not have existed at all. A great deal of development and progress of wireless telegraphy is due to the efforts of amateurs." And so it remains today. The pioneering spirit of Marconi will live on in the hobby of amateur radio into the space age of tomorrow. Well, who knows? Perhaps it might be your call sign I'm listening for next.
Golf 0 Kilo Alpha Quebec.
You can
Thank you
use
very
plain
much
language,
for calling me back.
and you can use the Morse code. Operating from the comfort of their own homes, amateurs contact each other by shortwave radio using specially authorised frequencies that can carry their signals to the four corners of the Earth.
My name is Ray, Romeo Alpha Yankee. Ray is the handle, and we are living in the countryside town in southeastern Finland, 20 kilometers from the Russian border.
Hello, I'm Jim Bacon. You may be more used to seeing me presenting the television weather forecasts.
Bravo 3 Romeo Sierra, listen. GB 3RS, Golf Bravo 3 Romeo Sierra, listen.
W0ORE on More Challenger. Very fine, John. We're just having a great time now. We had kind of a rocky start with the solar obs on day 3, but they're getting the problems worked out, and we're getting some good science. Okay, tell me what kind of scene I can send you, and I'll send it along. GB3RS W0ORE.
Today, I'm standing in front of the White Rose Amateur Radio Club in Leeds. There are something like 800 amateur radio clubs around the country, and to find out where they are, just look for the arrows. My own involvement in amateur radio goes back many years and helped me to develop a special interest in weather forecasting. This eventually led me into an exciting career in meteorology and then into television broadcasting. Good evening. Some quite wet weather across the region last night, amounts of rainfall just short of the half an inch in places. Most of that cloud has now moved away. Perhaps I should say a word about how radio works, what it is really. Normally when you talk to people you might be using a telephone.
liftoff. 32 minutes.
In 1985, amateur radio lifted off into space with Dr. Tony England, call sign W0ORE, on board. A keen radio ham since his school days, Tony England has helped to bring personal space communication to radio amateurs around the world. Using simple equipment, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world are talking to each other over the air every hour of the day. People of all ages and abilities join together as equals, whatever their background, in global communication.
This is